My name is Claire Bennett. I am 34 years old. Last Christmas Eve, my mother slid a gift box across her table and tapped the ribbon twice. This is your future, she said. Inside was a job contract. My own sister wanted to hire me as her assistant for $52,000 a year. My family had planned that moment for weeks. My sister smiled through the whole thing. Nobody at that table knew the truth. They thought I was a broke bookstore girl who needed rescuing. What they didn't know was that I owned a company worth $1.5 billion. I let them believe the lie. I wanted to see how my family treats someone they think has nothing. By the end of that night, my sister was crying on the kitchen floor. And it had nothing to do with my money. But here's the strange part. When I walked through that door, the box with my name on it was the smallest surprise waiting inside that house. If your family has ever looked down on you, stay with me. You won't guess what happens next. Let me start with a normal Tuesday, 3 days before that dinner. At 10 in the morning, I was kneeling in the children's section of my store, Dogwood Lane Books, in Maple Falls, Ohio. I've run that store for 9 years. The whole town thinks of me as the quiet Bennett girl who sells paperbacks and drives an old car. I drive that car because I like it. Try explaining that at my mother's table. Here's what the town never saw. That same afternoon, I climbed the stairs to my apartment above the store, opened my laptop, and signed a deal to buy a freight company for $40 million. One click. Then I walked back down and helped a 9-year-old find a book about volcanoes. That's my real life. 10 years ago, I started a company called Larks Holdings. We move goods for half the stores across the Midwest: trucks, warehouses, the hidden machinery behind every online order. The company is worth $1.5 billion and I own most of it. Outside a few lawyers and bankers, only 2 people knew that. My second-in-command, Rachel Morgan, who handled every public appearance. And my grandmother, Evelyn, who knew I was doing well and never once asked how well. My parents believed I was one bad month from asking them for rent. I never corrected them. Soon you'll understand why. That Tuesday my mother called. She has 2 voices, sweet as honey and sharp as a blade, and she can switch mid-sentence. Christmas Eve, our house, 6 o'clock. We're celebrating your sister. Lauren, she told me, had been made CEO of Bright Line Home. $600,000 a year. He let that number hang in the air like perfume. Then the blade came out, smooth and quiet. And there's something we want to discuss with you too. About your future. The bookstore was sweet for a while, honey, but sweet doesn't pay for retirement. We just want you to be somebody, Claire. She hung up before I could answer. In 11 years, I never found an answer she wanted to hear. I was not angry yet. Anger needs hope, and mine had healed into a scar long ago. To explain that scar, I have to go back 11 years. I was 23 and I had just watched my first business fail. A small delivery company with 2 rented vans and 14 months of 18-hour days. A big chain moved in and undercut every price I offered. I lost the vans, my savings, and I went home for Thanksgiving hollow, hoping someone might say, "You tried something hard." Instead, I walked into a family meeting. My mother had arranged the living room like a courtroom, me on the low stool, everyone else above me on the good furniture. She had written notes. She went through my failure line by line while my father studied his hands, and my sister, already a district manager at 26, said nothing. Then my mother leaned forward, took both my hands like a kindness and said, "Dreams are for people who can afford them, sweetheart." Everyone nodded. My uncle said, "Amen." That night I washed dishes so no one would see my face. Somewhere between the pots and the pie plates, something in me went cold and quiet. They would never watch me try again. If dreams were a luxury, fine. I would build mine somewhere my family could never window shop. Here's what nobody tells you about secrets. They start as a bandage and slowly turn into armor. One day you realize you've built a fortress and moved in alone. I took a night job at a warehouse outside Columbus and learned the freight business from the inside. At 24, I wrote software that cut our wasted driving by a fifth. Instead of selling it, I kept it, quit, and started Larks with 1 client and a laptop. Growth was slow, then sudden, the way ice cracks. We bought a warehouse company in year 3, 2 trucking firms in year 5. By year 7, online shopping was booming and lifted everything we'd built. Trade papers started writing about the mystery owner of Larks, because I'd hidden my name behind layers of paperwork. One reporter called me the ghost. I liked being the ghost. The ghost never sat on a low stool. My rule was simple. Information is inventory. I never let anyone see behind the curtain, not my parents, not old friends, not the men I dated who all eventually left. The way you'd leave a house where half the doors stay locked. The first thing I bought with real money was the brick building on Main Street, and I put a bookstore inside it because it was the one business nobody in my family would ever envy. In 10 years, exactly one outsider ever saw my face in a Lark's meeting room. Remember that. It matters later. 2 days before Christmas Eve, my phone buzzed with a group text titled, Christmas Eve Plan. My mother had forgotten to remove one member, me. The messages came in cheerfully, the menu, the seating chart placing me between my mother and Lauren's husband, Daniel. Then this, with a little heart symbol, Michael will read the letter after dessert. Lauren presents the offer. Don't bring up the assistant job until after the toast. And 30 seconds later, nobody tells Claire it's an intervention. She'll run. I watched the little dots appear and disappear. Lauren had seen it. Daniel had seen it. My father was probably in the room. Not one person wrote, wait, she's still in this group. Not one wrote, maybe we shouldn't ambush her at Christmas. The dots just stopped and I understood the whole dinner was scripted with me cast as the problem. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling a long time. Here's the part I'm not proud of. Underneath the hurt, something cold and patient sat up inside me. That night I didn't cry. I made a decision I'd spend the next few days calling research. My family believed I was broke, simple, out of chances. Fine. I would walk into that dinner as exactly the woman they'd invented, thrift coat, old car, wide trusting eyes, no defenses, and I would watch closely and finally, exactly how my family treats someone they believe has nothing. Every fake smile would become evidence. When the night ended, I would decide once and for all how much of my life these people deserved. You could call that a test. My grandmother would later call it something sharper. She'd be right. The next morning, Evelyn called the store. She's 86 and never calls just to chat. You're coming tomorrow? I said yes. A heavy pause. Good. I need you there, Claire. She hung up before I could ask why. My grandmother has never once needed me at a family dinner. That afternoon, Rachel sent me a file marked urgent. Notice the timing because I've had a year to notice it and still haven't gotten over it. It was a review of Brightline Home, one of Lark's biggest clients. Bills were coming in late, past 90 days. 2 straight seasons of missed shipping targets. Our team recommended ending the contract at the end of January, which for a retailer coming out of the holidays would be a heart attack. I read the summary and reached the paragraph about Brightline's brand new CO, hired 3 weeks earlier to save the sinking ship. Lauren Bennett Carter. My sister's $600,000 triumph, the whole reason for tomorrow's dinner, was the top job at a company my own team had just called in writing, a company circling the drain. She had no idea her biggest vendor was deciding her company's future from a bookstore in Maple Falls. I typed one line back to Rachel, hold the termination decision until after the holidays. No explanation. She never asks for one. That's why it's Rachel. The next evening I parked my old car behind a row of cars worth more than my parents' house, and walked in to be humiliated on schedule. The house looked like a catalog had exploded, garland everywhere, a 9-foot tree, a hired teenager taking coats. My mother met me at the door, scanned me top to bottom and sighed, "Oh Claire, you could have made an effort. Come in before the neighbors see." The dining table was set for 14, cream cards at each place, names in calligraphy and under most a job title. My card just said Claire. Nothing else. By the fireplace stood a man I'd never met, silver hair, golf tan. My mother lit up. That's Richard Hayes, chairman of Lauren's board. Isn't that marvelous? It was marvelous, and it was also, though she had no idea, the most dangerous thing she'd ever done to me because Hayes was looking at me the way you look at a word on the tip of your tongue. I'd seen him before across a lawyer's table in Chicago. During drinks, I asked Daniel what quarterly numbers meant and watched him grow 2 inches. I let my mother explain portfolio, with hand gestures while her friends traded soft looks of pity. My aunt asked if I was still doing the little book thing, and squeezed my arm twice, the way you comfort someone recently diagnosed. Nobody asked a single real question about my actual life. That was the first thing that genuinely hurt. I'd braced for cruelty. What I got instead was dismissal, warm and complete, the kind that smiles while it erases you. My mother tapped her glass. "We have a little family tradition," she announced. "We have no such tradition, but that night we did because that night had a script." She reviewed our family's year, really just Lauren's year, the interviews, the negotiations, the new office. When she reached the salary, she slowed down and gave every syllable its own spotlight. 600,000. The room applauded. My uncle said, "Now that's a return on investment." My father beamed the borrowed glow of a man clapping for someone else's storm. Then my mother turned to me and the room's temperature shifted. "And Claire is still with her little bookstore. We keep hoping." The laughter was quiet and terrible, the kind people give when the spotlight lands on someone else instead of them. I raced my eggnog, one broke girl saluting the fleet. But Richard Hayes wasn't laughing. He was doing arithmetic that wouldn't come out even. The doorbell rang and Evelyn blew in with the cold, 86 years old, fresh from driving her ancient car across town like a tugboat captain. She hugged Lauren, meant it, then found me and held on an extra second. "Stay close tonight," she whispered before moving to her seat, placed by my mother far down the table, the seat you give a child or a problem. Before dinner, Hayes cornered me by the drinks cart. "So, Claire, the bookstore sister." Small talk about supply chains, watching my face the whole time. Then, smooth from years of practice, Bright Line works with a company called Larkspur. Runs our entire backbone. Nobody knows who owns it. The trade papers call the owner a ghost. I asked, wide-eyed, if a company could really be owned by a ghost. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I was in a room in Chicago once. Lawyers everywhere. The ghost came for 10 minutes, never said a word, the whole room waited on her nod. Funny thing, you remind me of someone I saw there." The pause he left was a door held open. I giggled. "Me? I sell picture books to third graders." His face did something complicated. My mother swept him away to admire the tree and I breathed again. "They sent me for the mashed potatoes. Every ambush needs its errands." Under the tree, apart from the other presents, sat a box wrapped in cream paper with a wide red ribbon. The tag read, "To Claire, your future. Love, Mom and Dad." I read it 3 times. Through the kitchen doorway, I heard my mother and Lauren running through the schedule like producers before a broadcast. "After dessert, your father reads the letter. Then Lauren presents the offer, warm big sister, not boss." Then my mother's voice dropped into the courtroom tone I remembered from 11 years earlier. "Do not let her answer until everyone's watching. She won't make a scene in front of guests. She never does." And Lauren, my celebrated sister, said, "I know. That's what I'm counting on." I carried the potatoes out without spilling a drop. If you'd seen me, you'd have seen a plain woman doing an errand. You would not have seen the last soft thing I felt for that dinner quietly close its doors. This hadn't been an accident. They had rehearsed it. Dinner was long and shining, and I remember almost none of the food because all of it was preamble. When the pie was cleared, my father stood with a folded letter, his voice shaking because whatever else he isn't a natural executioner. "Claire, you're 34. It breaks our hearts watching you waste yourself." Every sentence was my mother's, dressed in his mouth. The bookstore was called Your Hiding Place. My old car got a mention. So did my empty ring finger, drawing a sympathetic murmur from the ants. I sat with my hands folded and took it, while around the table every face arranged itself into troubled compassion, which from where I sat looked exactly like an audience. My mother stood because the star never lets the opening act take the final bow. "We just want you to be somebody." There was the family motto laid on me like a wreath. Lauren brought the box and set it before me. Inside was an employment contract, executive assistant to the CEO, $52,000 a year, reporting to Lauren Bennett Carter. She leaned down, warm as a heat lamp. "You don't have to be great, Claire. You just have to be near it." I was staring at the signature line, my name printed under an offer smaller than what my company moved every 4 seconds, when my mother, flushed with momentum, added one more announcement. "Since we're all together, there's a family decision about Grandma Evelyn. We've listed the house on Chestnut Street. Mother Evelyn is moving to Silver Meadows. The house money will set her up beautifully." She turned to me, smiling without a gram of cruelty in her voice, which is the thing about my mother I've never been able to explain. "Honey, you couldn't buy the garage." The table chuckled. I looked down the table at my grandmother, the one person who had ever kept my secrets without demanding to see inside them, being sold off between the pie and the coffee. I understood exactly why she'd needed me there that night. My experiment was over. Something else had started. My mother laid a pen across the contract at a careful angle. "Sign it tonight, sweetheart." My aunt said opportunities like this don't knock twice. My uncle said some people need the nest kicked or they never fly. Lauren crouched beside my chair, eyes shining. I know it feels small, but I'll be right there. I can teach you everything. I thought of the room in Chicago, where nobody spoke until the quiet woman by the window nodded. I looked at the pen. 3 days earlier, with a different pen, I'd signed away $40 million and gone downstairs to find a book about volcanoes. Then for the third time that night, Hayes's phone buzzed. When he read the screen, the chairman of Bright Line's board turned the color of the tablecloth. I asked for a moment to think and stepped onto the back porch to call Rachel, who picked up on the first ring, which meant it was bad. Bright Line's board is meeting tonight. Emergency session. They're rushing through the new CEO's stock commitment, $340,000 personal money, so they can announce confidence before word about our review gets out. If we end the contract, they fold by spring. If we stay quiet, your sister buys the iceberg. Through the window, I watched my sister laugh, her head tipped back at the peak of her year, about to pour her savings into a hole her own board already knew was cracking. Nothing yet, I told Rachel. Keep your phone close. Then I went back inside where the night wasn't finished cornering me. Hayes caught my elbow in the hallway. Borrow you a minute? Michael's study. A chairman doesn't ask, he schedules. He shut the door and the charm came off him like a coat. Chicago. 2 years ago. A financing meeting. A woman came in late, sat in the third chair from the window, never said a word. When the terms changed at the last minute, every lawyer in that room stopped and waited on her nod. I've spent 2 years wondering who she was. Tonight I walk into a Christmas party and she's sitting across the table getting lectured about a bookstore. He leaned in an inch. So before I say a word to anyone, tell me I'm wrong. That was the last exit on the highway. I could have lied. I had 10 years of practice and a cover story boring enough to defend itself. My fortress would have held. Nobody would ever have known. But I stood in the house where I'd first learned to hide and I heard Evelyn's voice, stay close tonight, and I was so tired of being a ghost at every table I built and every table I was born into. Third chair from the window, I said. Richard Hayes aged and lit up at the same time. By God. You're the ghost. What he did next told me everything about him and the world my mother worships, because he didn't apologize for the evening he'd just watched them put me through. He negotiated. Extend the contract and no one ever needs to hear about tonight. The buy-in shores up the bridge. Your sister keeps her big job. Everybody wins. My secret, my sister's savings, his sinking ship, tied with one ribbon. Enjoy dinner, Richard, I said and walked out. My old life stayed behind in that room. I went straight to the back porch, no coat, and found it already taken. Evelyn sat on the glider, mittened hands around cold tea, watching the snow like it owed her money. I sat beside her. They get to the house yet? She asked. Or just the part where they save you from yourself? I told her both. She nodded, unsurprised. She'd smelled the whole plan days ago. That's why she'd summoned me. You know what your problem is, Claire? Same as your mother's, turned inside out. She needs the whole world to see her worth. You need to make sure nobody ever does. The glider creaked. You've been running a test on this family for 10 years, keeping score in that old coat. Nobody passes a test they don't know they're taking. I opened my mouth to defend myself and found nothing there. She patted my knee. Money is loud. Worth is quiet. But quiet and hidden aren't the same thing, and you've been calling one the other for a long time. Inside, the piano started. My mother was gathering her audience again. By the time I came in, Hayes had repaired his panic. He raised his glass. A little bird tells me Bright Line has exciting news coming with our partner Larkspur, he announced, looking right at me, a message, a lure, and a leash all at once. My mother lit up at the word partner and swung the moment back to me. Which makes tonight perfect, Claire. Sign it here with everyone we love as witnesses. The whole table turned, plus one chairman, watching to see if the ghost of Larks was about to become his new CEO's errand girl. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Lauren nodded, radiant, unaware she was 2 days from wiring her savings onto a sinking ship. We just want you to be somebody, my mother said again, holding out the pen. I asked to say something first. Lauren misread it as stage fright, laughed, and pulled me into the kitchen by the wrist, the way she used to pull me out of church. The door swung shut and my sister, $600,000 a year, sagged against the counter like a puppet with the strings cut. For the first time in 15 years I saw the real Lauren. Please just sign it, she said, voice thin as wire. I know it's beneath you. If you're settled, Mom will finally stand down. You have no idea what it's like being the one she stopped, but I heard the rest anyway. Being the one Mom aims at the sky instead of the ground. She rubbed her eyes, careless of her makeup. 3 weeks in and the numbers are fog. Finance keeps rescheduling my briefings. Now there's this buy-in, $340,000, my whole retirement account doesn't even know about it yet. But Richard says it's standard. She looked at me, my big sister drowning in a kitchen that smelled like pie. Just take the job, Claire. So one of us gets to breathe. That's when I finally understood the family math. They hadn't built a ladder for one daughter and a cage for the other. They'd built 2 cages and gold-plated one of them. My choices laid out neat as a report because that's how my mind works even with my chest aching. Stay hidden. Walk out, let the contract die in January, keep my proof my fortress survives and technically none of it would be my doing. Or spend it. Spend the secret I'd guarded for 10 years, the last clean answer to whether this family could love me small. Spend it all here tonight to save the sister who just asked me to be her assistant. Evelyn's words sat in the middle of it. Nobody passes a test they don't know they're taking. I finally did the math on what my safety had cost me. I took my sister's hand off my wrist, gently, the way you take a glass from someone before bad news. Then I walked back to the head of the table and did not pick up the pen. Lauren. One question before anybody signs anything tonight. Has anyone shown you Brightline's real aging report? Not the management version. Hayes set his glass down so fast it cracked against the piano. Claire, sit down, my mother hissed. I stayed on my feet, calm, because nothing unsettles loud people like calm. Bills unpaid past 90 days. 2 straight quarters of missed shipping targets to your biggest vendor. A credit line completely maxed out. Which is exactly why, 3 weeks after hiring you, your board needs its brand new CEO to write a personal check for $340,000 and call it confidence. Daniel snorted. Where's this coming from, Facebook? My mother stood, twisting her napkin. Your sister runs a company. You sell paperbacks. Apologize. I didn't move. I was watching Hayes, who had gone the gray of wet newspaper, laughing it off twice, both times the laugh dying before it left his mouth. Lauren looked from him to me, 3 weeks of confusion settling into one cold drop of understanding. I asked finance for the receivables detail twice, Richard. Twice. I got summaries. Her voice dropped, and for one proud second she sounded like Evelyn. Why does my sister know my numbers? I took one breath. 10 years long. Because Larks is mine. I founded it 10 years ago. I own most of it. My company runs every warehouse and truck Brightline has. My team has spent 3 weeks deciding whether to cut your company loose, Lauren. That's how I know your numbers. They cross my desk before they reach yours. Silence has a sound, ice shifting in 14 abandoned glasses. My mother laughed, genuinely, inviting everyone to join her, because the sentence couldn't possibly fit her world. Claire, sweetheart, Larks is $1 billion company. Richard, tell her. He looked at me, one long look, the whole equation finally balancing. Chicago, he said and sat down carefully, setting his drink on the floor. My mother's smile stayed up 3 seconds after everything behind it collapsed. I watched her face move from scorn to shock to calculation, the exact way a realtor recalculates a house once the neighborhood gets popular. I understood with total clarity the price of what I'd just spent. I would never again know which version of her love was for me and which was for the number. That answer had been the whole point of my test, and it burned down with the fortress in one sentence. Evelyn's mug clicked onto the side table. My father whispered my name like a fact he needed to check. I turned to my mother, quiet. You told me dreams are for people who can afford them. I could afford mine, Mom. You just never asked. My mother recovered the way weather recovers, total and shameless. 10 seconds of dead air, then the tears arrived on schedule, her arms rising like a drawbridge in reverse. My daughter. My brilliant, secretive girl. I always knew, didn't I, Michael? I stepped back one small step and it stopped her. No. You don't get to be proud of me tonight. An hour ago I was your failure. You wrapped my rescue in ribbon and rehearsed my ambush in the kitchen. The only thing that's changed is a number. I was always somebody, Mom. You were waiting for a number. My father stood and for the first time in my life went off script. Victoria, sit down. Let the girl talk. I read that letter tonight because you told me she needed saving. Seems to me we ought to hear what she thinks needs saving in this room. My mother sat. I turned to the chairman. Richard, here's what happens now in front of everyone you performed for tonight. Larks extends Brightline's payment terms 90 days and keeps the contract through the first quarter. 2 conditions. The equity buy-in disappears tonight, she never wires $1. And an independent audit, a firm of my choosing, full access, done by January 15th. She runs a real company with real numbers, or you explain to your board why your largest vendor sent a termination letter on December 26th while you sat here watching their problem get solved with her retirement account. You have until the coffee's cold. Nobody breathed. Hayes picked his drink up off the floor, set it down and said, agreed. Just that, gray and small. My sister made a sound I hadn't heard since we were kids, half hiccup, half sob, and walked into the kitchen where her legs simply gave out. She slid down the cabinets and cried into her hands in her beautiful suit. I told you at the start. By the end of that night my sister was on the kitchen floor crying, and it had nothing to do with anything I own. She was crying because someone had finally stood between her and the people spending her. It had never occurred to her that the someone would be me. I sat on the floor with her a while. Some things you do in a suit, some in an old sweater. When her breathing evened out, I got my coat and walked into the snow. My mother followed. This time she didn't perform. She stood under the porch light, arms crossed. My father told me a butcher's daughter shouldn't dream past the register, she said. I sold houses for 30 years to women who never remembered my name. I thought if you girls had titles, the world couldn't do to you what it did to me. That's what I thought love was. Armor. It's the closest thing to a true apology I've ever gotten from her. That's the first true thing you've said to me in 11 years, I told her. Say it again someday. Some night when you haven't just been caught. I drove home. In the mirror she grew smaller under the porch light, still standing there when I turned the corner. Here's what I carried home instead of the answer I'd gone looking for. I got proof of how they treat someone with nothing. The price is that I'll never fully trust how they treat me now that I'm someone. I made that trade with my eyes open and I'd make it again. Here's what a year did. The audit took 11 weeks and read like a weather report from inside a hurricane, 3 years of numbers wearing makeup. Hayes resigned as chairman in February, to pursue other opportunities, which in that world means before the vote happens. Brightline shrank by nearly half. Stores closed. What remained was smaller and honest and pays its bills within 30 days now. I know because I still see the reports. Lauren stayed. The remaining board offered her the job for real at a lower salary, and told me it was the first offer in her life she was certain she'd earned. Her savings never left her account. Daniel learned the truth in one long January night, and what happened to their marriage after that isn't mine to tell. The Chestnut Street house never got listed. I bought it that spring at fair price, clean paperwork, because Evelyn doesn't accept charity and I wasn't foolish enough to offer any. She still lives there and pays me rent of £1 a month, term she dictated herself. The trade papers got the ghost story by March. My town buzzed for 2 weeks, then did what small towns do best, decided the news was old. The bookstore is still open Tuesday through Sunday. And my mother and I began the slow work of figuring out who we actually are to each other, now that nobody is performing. This Christmas Eve there were 6 of us at a table set for 6. No hired teenager, no place cards, no titles under anyone's name, no toast reviewing the family's year, because we'd all lived it and didn't need the polished version. My mother is still my mother. In November she started telling neighbors her daughter worked in logistics, actually quite important. Caught my eye mid-sentence and stopped herself. That clumsy little correction, repeated a dozen ways over a dozen months, is what real change looks like at 63. Not a movie apology, just a woman catching her own voice and setting it back down gently. Under the tree this year was one small box, plain paper. Inside, a beat-up copy of the book I checked out of the library over and over the year I turned 12, the year she used to say reading wouldn't pay for anything. Inside the cover she'd written, "You were right about what things cost. Love, Mom." At dinner, a neighbor stopped by with cookies and my mother introduced me, choosing her words carefully. "This is my daughter, Claire. She reads more than anyone I know." No title. No number. Just that. Evelyn caught my eye from down the table and gave a slow wink, steady as a lighthouse. Money is loud. Worth is quiet. This year, for the first time, my family finally lowered its voice and I stopped hiding inside the quiet. If the people you love only seem to see you when you shine, remember this. The bravest thing isn't hiding your light, and it isn't blinding them with it either. It's standing in plain sight at your full and true size, and letting them choose what to do with the view. That's my story. One dinner. One box with my name on it. And a signature I never gave.